Hello, my friends, and I just want to do a little memorial for Richard Marcinko, the most badass Navy SEAL that ever lived. You might not know this, but on December 25th, this Christmas, he just died. And what terrible timing. Must have been terrible for his family, huh? And so this is just my little memorial, and I will have a bonus story at the end that most people don't know about at all. So Richard Marcinko, also called Dick Damo Marcinko, was the rogue warrior, the #1 best-selling New York Times here, and also the author of the series. And I highly recommend you read all 3 of these books. The first books for sure. They're really cool because the first book is purely autobiographical, and it's also called Red Cell 1. And then the second book in the series, which is Red Cell, is supposed to be fiction, but you can see it's almost all from his experiences, and they're pretty awesome books. So mandatory reading for all Special Forces fans. Like said, he was the most awesome Navy SEAL ever. And of course, being born in 1940, he was at the perfect age to go to Vietnam, and I think he was a captain in Vietnam. And he just did some crazy things. You're going to have to read his books. But one of his favorite things was to go to a village, find the VC, and kill them, but in just one hut, and then leave the rest of them alive so that they could see how lucky they were in the morning and see all of their dead friends. And this made him very hated among the VC. They put a prize on his head, and just crazy stuff. He also was a guerrilla fighter, adopting the clothes of the native peoples and painting his face black, all that kind of stuff. It was the most successful operation of the Special Forces in the Vietnam era. So in 1979 came the Iran hostage crisis, and a lot of bad things happened at the embassy there. They took over 100 hostages, and for 100 days or something, really long. And Jimmy Carter was known as a weak, very honest but weak president, and he totally miffed it. He tried to make it a big joint effort between Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines so that everybody could get some glory, and everybody died. 2 choppers full of people just got smashed in a sandstorm and burned and died. So they tasked Dick Marcinko with creating the first dedicated counterterrorism unit in the United States. I don't know how far Delta was along at this time, but this is the first dedicated to counterterrorism. And they always say that he's the first commander of SEAL Team 6. As in, no, he created SEAL Team 6. This is their first patch. And they became then Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGRU. And another thing most people don't know is that their budget for ammo was bigger than the entire Marines. So DevGRU, Team 6, they were shooters, and they shot more bullets in 1 year than the Marines did in 1 year, and they had the budget for it. And the 4-star general from the Pentagon, he gave Dick Marcinko the task of making this counter-terrorist unit, and his famous words were, "Dick, you will not fail." And so he made it. And afterwards, he also made a thing called Red Cell. After the Vietnam War, and there was a relative time of peace, and they wanted to test the security of all of their military bases, especially the nuclear military bases. And so they did, and here you see them roughing up some guys at the Seal Beach Naval Weapons Station, and they got a little too realistic for some people, and some of the officers didn't appreciate that at all. They came in and like terrorists and showed how weak their defenses were. They just simply jumped fences and all sorts of stuff. You can look up the videos on YouTube. Just type in Red Cell. Here they are roughing up the base commander. And so this made them very unpopular. And they were so realistic and so physical that they got sued afterwards. And they settled out of court. But they really roughed them up and showed them where their weaknesses were. And to see him smacking the guy there, and So this made them unpopular, and Dick Marcinko was the rogue warrior. And what I like about him, here they are, they didn't rough up the women, but they played psychological games with him. And I heard a lot of people soiled their pants during these exercises. And this whole thing went down at Seal Beach, and here's, I think, Westminster Boulevard, and I used to live there in the 90s, and this went down in the 90s, so it went down right under my nose, and I didn't even hear about it until 20 years later when I read his book. So that kind of shocked me, and after Red Cell, here's the bonus story. What most people don't know is that in 1982, Muammar Gaddafi, the leader or dictator of Libya, he wanted to do a hit job on Ronald Reagan. He was planning to kill him, assassinate him. So he sent out a call for tender for assassins, and he got, I think, 6 from Ireland, Germany, Italy, and Israel. And he was going to pay them 1 million each. So he had them in a secret location in Libya, and we don't know where it is, but they were being guarded by a whole squadron of Iraqi soldiers. So these 6 assassins were being trained and practicing the hit job in a secret part of Libya, guarded by a whole squadron, 30 plus soldiers of Libyan soldiers, not Iraqi soldiers. And so what did they do? Well, they got Dick Marcinko out there, and he went, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment of the Army took him over there in their MH-47 Chinook in the night, as usual. And he got his guys out there, and they did the Vietnam on them. They killed each and every one of the would-be assassins of Ronald Reagan in the night in their beds. And then they killed the entire squadron of Libyan soldiers, 30 plus soldiers, and not one casualty. And pretty crazy stuff. And then, because we had Lacrosse spy satellites, this was one of the first operations where the president and everybody in the CIA in Virginia and Washington, D.C. could watch in real time as Dick Marcinko and his team of only like 6 Navy SEALs, maybe 10 from Team 6, they fingerprinted all of the assassins, and they watched it from Washington, D.C. So that made President Reagan really happy, because he got to live. And you got to read his first 2 or 3 books, mandatory reading. They're really awesome. There's so many stories in here. When he was in Vietnam, he got invited to a dinner from one of the Vietnamese commanders on our side, and they wanted to test him to see if he would eat the poison sac of a cobra snake, right? That's what they they do. And there's a certain way to eat it so that you don't die. And he did that, and he didn't die. And so they highly respected him afterwards. And there are just so many amazing stories about this guy. In judo, there's this guy called Kimura, and he was the judo legend. And they say there was no one before Kimura and no one after Kimura. And that's exactly the same sentence that works here with Dick Marcinko. He was the Navy SEAL. There was nobody before him and nobody after him. Just an amazing guy. And so we need more Dick Marcinkos in the world. And so rest in peace, my friend. Real American hero.